What's email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Joining me on The Conversation today is John Miles, former U.S. Navy officer, Fortune 50 senior executive, award-winning host of the Passion Struck podcast, and author of the 2024 book Passion Struck, 12 Powerful Principles to Unlock Your Purpose and Ignite Your Most Intentional Life, which I think has already won some awards. Congratulations on that, and thanks for joining me on the show today.
Hey, Clint, it is so nice to be here, and what an honor to get to serve your audience.
All right, looking forward to it. So, John, I like to think about all my guests as superheroes, and every superhero has an origin story. So I'm just curious, what is yours? How did you go from, a child, wherever you grew up, to where you are today? What's your origin story?
Clint, I am a little bit different than most kids because I had a traumatic event hit me when I was about 5 years old. I was playing tag with some neighborhood kids, and as you probably remember from playing tag as a child, the game seems to get more rambunctious the more you play. And that's exactly what was happening. And we were pushing each other harder, running faster, and etc. And I happened to be running away from one of my neighborhood friends when, between the force of him pushing me and me running away from him, I was launched in the air and crashed through our basement window. And I woke up in the hospital realizing pretty quickly that my life was never going to be the same, as they had tubes coming out of my head trying to relieve the pressure on my skull. And that early trigger of realizing my life was going to be different, I didn't realize how profound it was going to be in the ensuing weeks and months following that, where all of a sudden I started to I started having speech impediments and learning difficulties that I never had before, cognitive difficulties, migraines, other things. And so I really learned what it was like to be a kid with a broken brain and how in an instant your life can be transformed. And for a while, for me, going to the speech classes was just a terrible experience because it made me feel different. But we moved from where I grew up in Bay Village to Palatine, Illinois, and I kind of got a fresh start. And for me, going to see my speech therapist ended up being a saving grace, because while the other kids were taking their normal English class, I would walk across what at the time as a youngster seemed like this marathon walk across this large field. But what she taught me was that we have control over our actions. We can control our behaviors, what we think about ourselves, how we perceive ourselves, and how we allow others to perceive us. So not only did she help me with my language skills, but she was helping me see myself differently and to have self-confidence when I felt at one of the lowest points in my young life. And I think that origin really has carried forward from that point till today, that I don't ever allow myself to see myself as a victim of my circumstances. And I've learned that no matter what obstacles hit us, typically they're beyond our control, but they're always something that we can learn from and grow stronger from. So that definitely led me in the path throughout high school of becoming a varsity athlete, the captain of the track and cross country teams, getting recruited as a Division I athlete, running, at the Naval Academy and so forth. And then it springboarded into my career in the Navy. And then beyond that, when I went into management consulting, and then later on as a senior executive in Fortune 50 companies. So I would say that having that mindset was extremely important, along with the other things that I picked up along the way.
That's pretty inspiring, actually. I noticed, I was going to say that as you were telling that story, I remember reading somewhere that you had graduated with honors, I believe, from the Naval Academy, and you also were an athlete there. So it sounds like while it was traumatic, you definitely overcame it, which is laudable.
Well, I think especially when we're young, we learn to adapt, and I developed an auditory processing disorder plus the language difficulties that I had. And I just had to teach myself a different way of learning. For me, the typical classroom setting was really arduous. And it's funny because when I talk to college professors, they commonly tell me that it is the most useless way we learn, yet it is the most predominant way. So I had to really expose myself into ways that I could actually do what was being taught, because that's how I learned, was through action. So I had to spend a lot of time throughout my life outside of the classroom to actually learn the information. And I think the same is true with many people.
Yeah. So you were sharing your journey from traumatic injuries as a child, Naval Academy, the Navy, and then senior executive, and then on where you are today. And you certainly mentioned the traumatic injury you had as a child. Is any other key moments in your adult life that maybe shaped or experienced your career path?
Yeah, I think there are a number. I'll go back to my running career. When I was in high school, I never thought I was going to do anything with running. I never thought I would be any good at it at all. I kind of grew up as an overweight kid, and I was trying to change my body image going into high school, which is the reason I started to run, was to lose some weight. And my freshman year started out with me being kind of indoctrinated by the seniors on the team, which is pretty common. But the seniors on the team were honestly kind of goofballs who didn't really care about the team winning. But I had some classmates who were really serious about it. So having that conscious realization to break away from the bad influences who were these seniors and to start trying to immerse myself with those who actually gave a damn about winning and were serious about training was something that really was an initial introduction into what toxic people in our lives can do to us and how they can take us away from what could be our best lived moments, because they steer us in directions that are counterproductive to where we want to go. And by getting more immersed with those better athletes, when you're with people and you're training with people who are better than you, it ends up just up leveling your game, because you're trying to keep up, you're trying to be better, you're learning from their attitude, from the disciplined way that they're doing things. And so over time, you start adopting those behaviors yourself. And going into my sophomore year, I really had this strong aversion to competing, meaning I would almost psych myself out by becoming so nervous, even to the point of throwing up sometimes, because I was so anxious before we raced. And so I started to learn that I needed to treat every single day of practice as if it was actually the meet. And by doing that, I conditioned myself to start putting myself into hardship on an everyday basis and not allowing myself to get psyched out, because I was developing this mindset that if I treat every day as it's the race day, then when I get to the race, I'm not scared about how I'm going to perform because I'm already giving it my all. And that really changed my outlook, not only on running, but how I prepared myself later in life for tests, whether it was going on combat missions or having to give a presentation to Michael Dell or the CEO of Lowe's, and not psyching myself out before it, but being prepared and knowing that I had the self-confidence going in that I was going to do the best job that I possibly could.
What a brilliant way to solve that problem. I don't think I could have done that. I think that I would have said, I'm just going to throw up that many more days now, so I'm not even going to go down that path. So good for you. What motivated you to start your Passion Struck podcast, and how has your background influenced the themes and topics you cover on the podcast?
So for anyone who's a business executive, things might have changed now, but in the era that I grew up in, the last thing that Lowe's or Dell or whoever it might be wanted you to do was to be talking about yourself and self-promoting. So for the vast majority of my professional career, although I had a LinkedIn account, I wasn't out there trying to develop a personal brand. And as I look back, it's something now that I encourage people to do much more of, because what I didn't realize at the time was even if you're on a job interview or you're on a sales call or something else, people are constantly doing research on you. And the more you can put yourself out there in a positive image, the better it helps in all those situations. So to make a long story short, when I started to consider what I was doing with Passion Struck, I initially thought I would write a book as the entry point. And I quickly found, as I was talking to book agents, that the industry had completely changed. And it wasn't the day anymore where you could just publish a book and publishers would pick it up. They were more concerned that you had some type of platform to amplify the book. And it's also changed that the actual publishers aren't really helping you, I have found, advertise your book. You have to do so much of this on your own. So I started to think about, since I didn't have a platform, what was the best way for me to try to build a personal brand? How could I get myself out there and test the concepts that I had in my head that I wanted to write about? And so I did two things. I started a blog, and at the same time, I started podcast episodes. And they were both transformative because I started to see from those who were viewing the content what was working and what wasn't. And on the podcast, I initially did it through more of a broad lens, but the further I got into it, the more I started to hone in on the core message of the importance of living intentionally and the importance of intentional behavior change and the choices we make. And the more I leaned into that as the viewpoint and the centralized focus, the more the podcast started to hockey stick and the more the message was resonating with different people. And so that was really the origin behind how I got to doing the podcast.
And then you did do the book after that, right?
Yep. The podcast started in February of 2021 and the book came out in February of 2024.
And I was looking at the book, it's already got some accolades, so that's pretty impressive. Just 2-3 months in and bam, you're already doing quite well with it.
Yeah, for me, I think a lot of people look at the New York Times bestseller, the Wall Street Journal bestseller as litmus test. And for me, that was never the litmus test. I wanted the book to resonate with readers and for them to find value in it. So when it was recognized by the Next Big Idea Club as a must read, that to me really was such an unexpected honor. And then since then, it's won the Eric Hoffer Book Award and the Best Business Minds Book Award and the Nonfiction Book Awards. All of these things were so unexpected. But what's most important to me is that the book is actually making a positive impact and helping people change the way that they're living their lives.
And you can certainly see that. I looked up some of the reviews on Amazon, and all of them are 5 stars, and it's transformational, and you should read this book. So I think you've succeeded in what you were trying to accomplish then.
Yeah, I'll tell you though, Clint, it has always been such a hard road. I mean, I guess that's one thing I'd like to tell the audience is none of this has come easy, whether I had probably 80 turndowns, rejections as I was on the path to publishing the book. Initially, I was going to self-publish, was literally weeks away from doing it when I decided to give myself one more chance to go out to agents and publishers. I mean, the podcast initially was not an overnight success. It took me making a number of intentional changes to it for it to take off. And even getting book endorsements and book reviews is not a simple thing. You've got to constantly go out there and make people want to give them to you. So I have not found any of this to be easy, but I think the harder things are, the more rewarding they are in the end when you see them resonating.
I certainly share that. I've published 2 books myself, and you actually said something it just struck me, and that is they don't give you any support. At least the companies that I did with, they didn't give me any. It's basically, okay, here's your book. We'll send boxes wherever you want them and go figure it out. Like, okay, that's not what I expected. I thought you would help me market it, sell it, but that's not how it works. So you have to end up doing that on your own. And then the other thing you said that I really liked was you decided to give yourself one more chance. And I would certainly echo that to the audience. It's amazing how much that one extra chance will do for you. I know when I was trying to buy the company that I now own, I talked to 12 different banks and who all said no. And I gave myself one more chance, and that bank said no, but they said, here's the answer to how your 12th bank will say yes. And so I went back and was able to do the deal to buy the company, but it was a struggle. And you get so many doors slamming in your face and you want to give up, but you just give yourself that one more chance. And look at what happened. You got your book published the way you wanted it to.
Yeah, I'm so happy that I went down the route I did, because a lot of the awards that the book is now up for, if it had been self-published at the time, it wouldn't have qualified. But I share your pain. The publisher who did my book, although it's distributed by Simon & Schuster, they're a smaller publishing house, and they don't even put their authors up for awards. So literally they'll submit you for one of the major reviews, but outside of that, there's literally been no help at all on this journey. So you learn really what rejection really means and what the importance of perseverance is when you are an author, because it is a lonely road if you want to get the book out there and have it continue resonating with readers.
So hopefully some publishers are listening to this, and we'll learn from our feedback and actually do better for the next guy or lady who comes along. So how do you define self-leadership, and why do you think it's critical for leaders to cultivate this skill?
When I think of self-leadership, I think of a quote that Sharon Salzberg, the author and philosopher, has said in the past. There's no commodity that we can take with us. There's only our lives. And this is my favorite part. Whether we live them wisely or whether we live them in ignorance. And this is everything. And to me, when I think of self-development, it's making the choice that she talks about. Are you going to live your life wisely? Or are you going to live it with ignorance? Because both of them are a choice. And I think that's the thing we fail to see in life, is that every day we have tens of thousands of choices that we get to make. And most of the time we end up living our life, I know a lot of people say, on autopilot, but I think it's the wrong analogy to how so many people are living today, because even when the plane is on autopilot, it's still going typically in a positive direction. I think the better analogy for how so many people are living today is if they're pinballs. And instead of playing the game of pinball and learning how to master it, we let the game master us. And the same thing happens with life. We are so unintentional about how we're living it that we let the distractions in the game of life or pinball basically take us on the path that our life goes. And so a lot of what my focus has been on teaching people is that everything, whether it's your physical health, your mental health, the strength of your relationships, your career, your financial success, are all built upon having the autonomy of the choices that you make. And it's really the choices that we make in the micro moments of life that have the most profound, long-standing difference in our lives. It really shapes, are we taking a path that's going to be to greatness, or are we taking a path that leads to, as Sharon says, ignorance or a valley of despair. And it's really that multitude of choices that build upon each other that take you in one of those two directions. And I think that's what really self-development, self-mastery is really all about, is choosing to live your life wisely.
Well, speaking about living your life, in your book, you talk about living a life with passion and purpose. And I was wondering, how can managers or leaders really apply these principles in their daily work?
Yeah, so when I originally wrote Passion Struck, I originally approached it as a business book, and the original versions of the chapters were actually more business themed. The publisher suggested that I make it more an individual, but the themes really work in either direction. And so the way I organize the book is it consists of a framework that I call the Passion Struck model. And in the model, there are really 4 extremely important components and 3 underlying components to it. So the model has mindset changes, behavior changes, intrinsic motivation, and deliberate action as the key themes. And that's how the book is organized. So the first section of the book is about mindset shifts, which is really the who we are, and it influences the behavior shifts, which is really how we live our lives. And then the third portion of the book I call the psychology of progress, which is really the combination of taking deliberate action and the importance of being motivated not by the extrinsic things in our life, such as title, money, possessions, but by the intrinsic things that really light that inner fire that I have on the cover of the book. And so if you break down these mindset shifts and the behavior shifts, I can take a couple of them and apply them to a business manager's life. So one of the things that I talk about in the book, and I've already mentioned, is the impact of toxic people in our lives. And so one of the mindset shifts that I talk about is the need to be a mosquito auditor. And the way I came up with this chapter is I happened to be reading a book by Jonah Berger around invisible influence. And I was on a walk with my dog, and I started to think about, there are so many invisible influences that are around us that we don't necessarily pay attention to. And I was trying to think of how do I approach this chapter so that it could make sense to people. And I started to listen to a radio show, and the announcer started to talk about the most dangerous animal on the planet. And listeners were calling in and giving responses the same way that my mind was thinking, that maybe it's a shark, or it's a type of snake, or a spider, or the tiny jellyfish that they have down in Australia. And all of us were so wrong from the truth. The most dangerous animal on the planet is actually the mosquito. And when you start thinking about that the mosquito on a yearly basis takes millions of lives, we don't think about that when we have mosquitoes around us. In fact, oftentimes, even when we hear them, we're swatting them away, but we don't think about the long-term consequences that their bites can have on us. And the same thing goes with the people that are in our lives. And so in this chapter, I define really 3 different types of mosquitoes that infiltrate our lives. There's the bloodsucker, the invisible suffocator, and the PETA. And the bloodsucker is that type of person in a work environment that we meet who you can feel that all they want is that very last drop of blood that they can get from you to make their life better, to make their career prosper, to make everything about them better. But they don't really care about how your life is going or what them taking every drop of blood from you, the impact that it has on your life. Then you have the invisible suffocators, which are the glass half empty people that we have in our work environments, who when you tell them a new idea of something that you can do to make the business better, they immediately talk about the ramifications of that decision and why it's not going to work. And then the PETA is, sometimes I've heard people refer to this, is the people who are pieces of work or the pain in the asses who just go out of their way to make life miserable. They gossip behind your back. They do things to thwart the positive direction that your group might be trying to go in, or they infiltrate the way that you're trying to do your individual contributor assignments. So the importance is to realize these type of people and how they are toxically infiltrating your work environment. And then once you know who they are, and I tell people a great way to do this is to think about yourself shooting archery. I mean, put the 5 people at work who are the closest to you in the bullseye. Do any of them represent the bloodsucker, the invisible suffocator, or the pain in the ass? Then go to the next circle, the next circle, the next circle. And once you start identifying them, you've given yourself an incredible gift. So now you can set up boundaries and protect yourself from what they're doing in your life and realize how they are impacting you. And if you're a manager, not only you, but your entire team's work performance.
Well, that concludes part 1 of my conversation with John Miles. In part 2, we explore the importance of originality and adaptability, overcoming self-doubt, and strategies for project managers. John also shares insights on servant leadership, materialism, and the value of focus and continuous learning.
We need to examine, what does defeat look like in life? And I think sometimes we defeat ourselves even before we get to the battlefield, because we ourselves become our biggest critic. And one of the things that I try to make people see is that every day when they look at themselves in the mirror, they're looking at the greatest human being that they will ever meet in their lifetime. Because no one is as unique as the person that you see back in that mirror.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.